Morning, everyone, and welcome back to the day 2 of our conference. We're kicking things off with a very special guest today who probably needs no introduction, but I'll try anyway, and I'll cut it off short because, let's just get to the real action. It's my honor to welcome Dr. Anantha Nageswaran, the CEA of the Government of India, someone who helps steer the big picture for our economy from growth forecast to policy priorities. He joins us today for a conversation on Indian outlook, global headwinds, and the road ahead. He'll be live on a video conference, as you can see, from the FinMin headquarters in New Delhi. So let's hi to him, and sir, over to you.
Thank you, Madhavi. Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. Good morning, everybody, and please accept my apologies for not being able to join you in person, and I hope you're able to see the screen. So thank you, good morning once again, and let me sort of start with the very clear declaration. Let us get a few things out of the way. I have no crystal ball as to how the current impasse plays out and over what duration. And some of you who are probably as old as I am, or may not be at least too young not to have seen this ad, not to have missed this ad before. This is the old Amritanjan ad. I don't know if the audio plays out, but let me try this.
Hiya. It's gone. ওই তো বুঝি ஒய்ந்து காலங்கள் மாறினாலும் அமிர்தஞ்சன் மாறவில்லை. 100 ஆண்டுகளாக நம்பிக்கை பெற்றுள்ள இந்தியாவின் தலைசிறந்த பலி நிவாரணி.
Okay, so basically the point is, I don't think we have a magic rub like Amritanjan and say the tariff impasse is gone within a minute or two, because we don't know the underlying reasons. As you and I are, all of us are consuming the same information out there in the world. A lot of reasons are attributed, but it is very difficult to know which one is the true driving force, whether it is the fallout of the Operation Sindoor, his role, whether it is actually the trade offer that India put on the table, or is there something else that is going on which could be even more strategic. And everybody is aware of the impact. It's not that difficult to estimate the share of the exports to the US as a share of overall exports, and look at the price and demand elasticities and make some assumptions and come out with the first cut impact. But the more important thing is, and the more difficult one to model is, of course, the second and third round effects that comes because of the impact at the first instance, due to uncertainty, damage to sentiment, and also due to potential dislocation in some of the enterprises that will be affected in the key industries like gems and jewelry, shrimps, and textiles. The government is aware of the situation, and I'm sure in the coming days and weeks you will hear the government's response. And I just want to mention one thing. If you go back 5 years ago when COVID broke out, there was a feeling that the government of India did not come out with any quick answer, but the first Atmanirbharta package came out in May, while the COVID pandemic was declared as a global pandemic sometime in February. This time it won't take that long, but I'm just saying that in the social media dominated world where we are looking for instant responses, one has to be a little bit patient. The government will be hearing out the affected sectors and parties, and some of the conversations have already commenced, and the response will be forthcoming. As far as the trade negotiations themselves are concerned with the United States, I'm not the one in a position to comment on it. There are multiple stories about whether the U.S. delegation is coming over to India on the 25th of August or not. A lot would depend on probably what happens on the 15th of August, etc., at the meeting in Alaska. In general, without any particular underlying background information or logic, I still believe that given the fluidity with which things have been moving rapidly from antagonism to cooperation to to stalemate to etc. between different parties in the world, I do believe that the current situation will probably ease out in a quarter or two. So I don't think from a long-term picture the impact will be that significant, but in the short run, yes, there will be some impact. So with that comment out of the way, let me move on to the more important picture. I just want to share with you the global development history, and the reason I'm doing so is that tariffs have always played a part in the global development journey. Professor Robert Allen gave this lecture about 12 years ago, and he identified 5 elements of a country's successful development based on history of the today's developed nations. And these videos are available still on the YouTube, and basically he identified internal free market, which we have tried to achieve with goods and services tax, a stable domestic banking system, high external tariff. So countries did practice high external tariff on their journey to being developed. In fact, most of them opted for open markets only when they felt they had the domestic capability to sell something in the international markets. Until then, they were engaging in all kinds of protectionist policies, including intellectual property theft, etc., and both tariff and non-tariff barriers. Universal education, we are getting there in terms of enrollment. Quality has a lot of room to pick up. And sound infrastructure, again, that it is a good journey we have done in the last 12 years or so, but it is always a work in progress for a country of our size. So the key element I want to leave with you is that while India was, singled out as one of the countries which have very high tariff rates, external tariffs have always played a role as countries try to catch up with others in the global competitiveness race. The other element of the global development journey is, of course, the importance of affordable and plentiful energy. Economic historian Professor Peter Temin, in his very wonderful paper in 2014, and I would urge you to read it, it's a short paper, gives you a history of the Industrial Revolution and the industrial development of the West. And much of it was caused by the Great Plague, which led to the loss of labor in substantial numbers in the developed world. Naturally, they had to rely on capital and technology because they had no choice. This is how the technology-led growth developed in the West as a result of the health epidemic, the Great Plague that happened. It was an accident of history. But more importantly, this was powered by extremely cheap and affordable power. So you need a combination of high wages and very cheap power to have capital and technology-led growth. Naturally, developing countries like India, given its size especially, which are very highly endowed in labor, will be at a competitive disadvantage faced with goods coming from countries which have had the benefit of scale, technology, capital, and cheap power. Which is one more reason why, as Professor Peter Temin writes, countries with low wages like India struggle to maintain production in the current world of low tariff. He wrote that back in 2012. So I think the point is, once again, the important thing is, it is not that protection per se is a bad word, but protection was and is inevitable, was practiced, and more importantly, protection has to be in return for productivity and performance accountability in terms of improving external competitiveness. It cannot be forever. But moving on from this historical context to where we are today, we need to appreciate the fact that the economic survey of the last 2 to 3 years since I took up this role, we have maintained that export growth was going to be a challenge. We need to do a lot more to grab market share because the pie itself would not be growing too fast. And we saw that in the trade restrictions that were imposed post 2015, in the sense that in the last several years, tariff and non-tariff barriers began to proliferate in the world, not just from the United States, from everywhere. In fact, if you look at the number of trade restrictions directed at China from the European Union, 80% of all European Union's trade restrictions are actually directed at China. This is available in the Mercator Institute of China Studies, located in Germany, this data. So what you see on the right side, applied tariff rates kept coming down and trade to GDP kept rising. This chart is until 2008, but after that, I think things began to plateau quite a bit. So the important thing is India could not have assumed a very big contribution to GDP growth coming from net trade as we assumed, as we experienced between 2003 and 2008 in any case. So therefore, much hard work had to be done even otherwise, notwithstanding the current tariff impasse, because the global trade environment was becoming very restrictive. Friendshoring, nearshoring, onshoring, all these things became important. I mean, this slide coming from my good friend Neelkan Mishra's deck about a few months ago, I think captures the real problem, but we seem to have temporarily moved away from addressing this issue predominantly from the US perspective for various tactical or strategic reasons we don't know yet. The main issue in the world is actually the imbalance between production and consumption. One country consumes more than what it produced, and another country produces a lot more than it is willing to consume or allows the country to consume. So there is a consumption shortfall due to both domestic political and economic reasons, and there is a production shortfall which is mostly for profitability reasons, which the US companies were happy to outsource to China. And therefore, if you take out US, there is really no import growth. If you take out China, there is no export growth in the world. And that is a challenge, that's a concern, because the problem that United States began to address vis-a-vis its trade actions was mainly to reduce this $1 trillion trade deficit vis-a-vis $1 trillion trade surplus of China. But then it has morphed into different directions right now. But China's trade surplus isn't a problem only for the United States. It is a problem for other countries because the excess capacity, in fact, in a light ravine, I can say that I saw a news story yesterday that China has an excess capacity in porcupines as well. But the point is, excess capacity in China naturally creates uncertainties for businesses elsewhere in the region. Exporters cannot expand their manufacturing capacity, and hiring and therefore capital formation in developing countries are also impacted adversely. So this is a challenge that should have been tackled in a global manner. On the contrary, what is happening for various reasons, some of the other countries who are equally affected by this consumption production imbalance are the ones that are facing the flak, which is a bit of a strange situation. But if you really look at why we are today where we are in the world, not just in India or US or China or Europe, but in the world, is partly because of the way we started addressing global problems with only monetary policy. Back in the QE time, when the world faced the financial crisis, if we have definancialized at the global level, and did the hard yards in terms of restoring competitiveness and moving back to manufacturing in the developed world from the outsourcing model they were following for close to a decade and a half, although the first outsourcing started way back in the 1960s. You can pick it up in the chip war. The point is, the response to the global financial crisis based on QE and low interest rates spawned asset price bubbles, but not necessarily capital formation, because the outsourcing model continued. There was no willingness to bring back manufacturing. So as a result, the cheap money only created financial investments rather than real investments, leading to inequality, imbalances, distortions, and which is what led to different political movements arising in Europe and in the US and other parts of the world as well, leading to immigration crisis. So many of these things followed from the excess growth in financial investments and financial asset valuations as compared to real asset expansion in the developed world, starting from 2001 with China's entry into WTO and policy responses usually relying on monetary policy in response to all crises. So what is interesting about this slide, developed first in 2020 by Mr. Alberto Gallo, is the three boxes at the bottom. He predicted that this would eventually lead to trade wars, financial repression, and military conflicts. We have two of those three boxes, and financial repression was there during pre-COVID and post-COVID as well, but I think we still await full-scale financial repression in many parts of the developed world, which means currencies in the developed world will be more facing depreciation pressure, and currencies like Indian rupee, which may not appear imminent right now, will have to actually be prepared for currency strength in the coming years rather than currency weakness. Very quickly, in terms of the policy priorities and challenges that we face, while tariffs and uncertainty dominate our mind space, in truth, the medium-term challenges, that is why I said to you the global context, are about ensuring a right balance between energy security and affordability on the one hand, and this energy transition due to climate change and fossil fuel diversification, etc. And then again, more recently, all of us may be getting familiarized and sensitized to the impact of artificial intelligence on labor displacement. But we have to create at least 8 million jobs in the next 10 to 12 years per annum. And allied to that problem of employment growth is income growth and a fair share of income. I think post-COVID, due to various structural developments and also due to corporate priorities, the share of income accruing to labor has been coming down, and it is there in the data, whether you look at listed entities or you look at the PLFS data that shows you real wage growth being negative in urban India, etc. This is emerging as a big issue. These things may not be occupying our minds right now, but they are key ones. And then there is a lot of policy action and concern about education, employability and skilling, but we also need to appreciate that employability and productive labor arise not just from education and skilling, but also physical and mental health. And even there, I think some of the Indian private sector entities have to appreciate the role they play in ensuring that the Indian population, especially the youth cohort, remain healthy because of screen time, ultra-processed food consumption, etc., leading to anxiety, suicidal thoughts, etc. I think we have a huge challenge here, and there too the private sector has to play a role. And rise of manufacturing and the rise of small and medium enterprises both have to go together. And this is where I think the bulk of the role of public policy is there. In the previous areas, in fact, most of the action has to come from the private sector. Energy affordability, energy transition is of course a policy area, but in ensuring the rise of manufacturing and the growth of SME, deregulation and provision of capital at affordable rates, ensuring low cost of capital and financial system capabilities, the financial sector growth, these are all the areas where public policy has a very big role to play. Agricultural productivity as well, that is a very big role for public policy. We can actually add 0.5% to real GDP growth if we get the agricultural policies right in terms of empowering farmers in where to sell, when to sell, whom to sell, at what prices to sell. Moving on, very quickly on some of these dimensions, not on all the dimensions I picked. So these are really the medium-term growth challenges for us. If we step beyond 25, 26, these challenges all countries face, most developing countries face, but India's situation is unique given its size and given therefore its low per capita income. I would encourage you all to read this particular Substack post of the author Ed Conway and chief economist of Sky News, and he has published a very good book called The Material World. If you haven't read it, I would very strongly recommend this. And what he is saying about is that what I shared with you earlier, the Industrial Revolution was not just a revolution of ideas and engineering and chemistry, it was an energy revolution. The vast majority of the processes you have encountered, he is referring to his book in the preceding pages, from the transformation of sand into glass, creation of silicon chips, production of chlorine out of brine, conversion of iron into steel, generation of electricity, depends on enormous amounts of energy, most of which is currently delivered to us directly or indirectly by fossil fuels. This book was written only in 2022 or 2023. The extraordinary explosion of wealth and well-being that began somewhere in the middle of the 19th century might be better seen as an extraordinary harnessing of these fuels to do stuff, to create stuff. All economic activity, therefore, is to a greater or lesser extent the deployment of energy. Now, why is this important? Because there is an energy gap today. The energy per capita in the world, if you look at China, it has caught up quite a bit, but even then the gap to the developed world is very high. And if we are going to go towards net zero, and even if we implement renewable energy by 2030 or 2050, this gap will still remain. On the right side, you can see, on the left side is the current energy per capita gap. On the right side is what happens by 2050 when countries do renewable energy and developed country also reduces its fossil fuel consumption. Even then, the energy gap will remain. So the point, that's what he's saying here. The lines converge, but there is still an enormous energy gap. All of a sudden, it goes from being an ever upward path of energy consumption to flattening. And for India and sub-Saharan Africa, it's even worse. They languish in energy per capita terms below everyone else, trapped seemingly permanently in a low energy world. This chart is not a fossil fuel chart on the right side. It's energy of all stripes, including green energy. It is saying these nations and regions will be energy poor, even if it is green energy. And this is the developed world's vision of net zero. That's the reality. This is not good versus bad, much as we would like it to be. It's far more naughty than that, nor is it just about fossil fuels or carbon. It's about energy and access to energy, and about whether the energy rich have any right to commit billions of people to a lifetime of energy poverty. Now, these are not my words. These are from Ed Conway. And the more we try to undertake renewable energy or energy into greener fuels, we have to keep in mind whether we are going to create energy security and maintain energy affordability as well, considering what happened in Spain on April 28th and so on. So I think it is very important, while what happens to the tariff is indeed important thing for the next quarter or two until the current financial year. These are far more serious challenges for India's medium-term growth outlook. So, therefore, the pace with which we undertake energy transition and whether we are able to account for all the cost of renewable energy, including strategic vulnerability, all these and our dependence on other countries for raw materials, rare earths and manganese and critical minerals, and the revenue impact it will have, considering the taxes we collect on petrol and diesel at the moment. All these things have to be factored in when we talk of renewable energy share going up or going into EV. So what goes into the E is very important, and strategic dependencies also we need to keep in mind. We cannot go from crude oil import dependence to critical minerals and rare earths import dependence. Understand that crude oil at least is more diversified. Sources are diversified. Rare earths and critical minerals are concentrated in a few places. which are politically unstable, and bulk of the processing happens in one country. So in fact, we are not reducing import dependence or import vulnerability, supply vulnerability, we will be enhancing it. So these are the things I wanted to leave with you. Now, quickly moving on to the real challenge. This is another Substack post from somebody whom I didn't know, but I stumbled upon this. And this is the point he was raising in the context of what's happening between the US and China in terms of magnets. Now, while these sentences are there in terms of American context, if we substitute the word America with India, these sentences will be extremely relevant. For example, second bullet, Indian policymakers must choose between accepting permanent strategic dependence on adversaries or committing the resources necessary for genuine supply chain independence. And then in the first bullet point, you can see, can democratic market economies compete against authoritarian state capitalism in industries requiring massive long-term investment and political will? So I think it's important that given the magnitude of challenges we face, it is not only about public policy. It is about private sector also understanding the gravity of the challenges we face, enhancing its R&D spend. Because government today has created the Anusandhan National Research Fund and the Research and Development Innovation Fund by seeding them with capital. These capital corpus have to be enhanced with private sector participation, identifying areas where deep research have to happen and where domestic capabilities have to be generated. The answers and the fruits will not come in the next few quarters, but in the next few years, but we have to start today. So that is why I feel the focus on the current trade-related uncertainty should not blind us to the more important challenges. The other issue is the artificial intelligence. While there are many positives in areas like healthcare and education, it's equally important that in the Indian context, given the numbers, we have to focus on the downside risks as well. It provides cost incentive to firms, but naturally whether the productivity and the profitability will be equitably shared with the working class is a big question. And education, there are concerns about cognitive impairment and cognitive debt that students will encounter if they outsource even thinking and not just information gathering. Okay. So on the AI, I was just saying that we have a lot of positives that are anticipated, yet to arrive, but it is there. But if you look at the pernicious possibilities, you have the impact on cognitive debt, you have the impact on where the productivity and the profitability gains will accrue and how they will be shared, etc. Apart from concerns about data, about resource intensity, water and power, and also various issues about culture, safety, and geopolitics, etc. So there are multiple areas where the cost can accrue, where benefits may end up being somewhat limited, even though they are real and substantial in specific sectors. And India, having created a lot of formal jobs in the low value added IT enabled services in the last 20-30 years, if you look at an article that appeared in Economic Times yesterday, which showed that those who are migrating from the Indian software majors into the GCCs owned and operated by foreign companies, only 1 in 10 applicants who want to move from ITES companies to GCCs get absorbed. So you can see the skill levels and the employability being a factor already. So the employment consequences, and apart from various other dimensions that I mentioned, have to be kept in mind, and there are no easy answers here. So we have to carefully choose the areas in which we allow AI to be deployed and harnessed, and also the speed with which we do so. And clearly the water and the energy requirements of AI data centers and the ever-advancing computing capabilities of the GPUs, there is an incompatibility with net zero goals as well, which the developed world wants to pursue. Lastly, in terms of geopolitical challenges, if you look at the various areas of AI and semiconductors, whether it is from engineering, design, to assembly, to core IP, to testing and packaging, if you look at the market share of various countries, India is not there. And even now, the amount of GPUs allocated to India, they haven't fully coming yet. So if we are going to compete with US and China, we have a lots of work to do, even in the areas of security, etc. Because both with respect to the technological capabilities and the physical resource investment required, we have a long way to catch up. And this cannot be done only either by the private sector or by the public sector, but in tandem, in which case resources have to be reallocated from other areas as well. So these kinds of conversation have to happen between the two sectors, private and public. And this story is a very interesting one as to how America lost its manufacturing to China. This is a story captured in this particular Substack post. There was a company called Magna Quench, which GM sold in 1995 for only $56 million to another company, which was a front for Chinese companies. And then Magna Quench was supplying 85% of the rare earths to American defense industries. Therefore, the State Department overruled the sale, but and allowed the sale to go through, even though Pentagon was not happy with the sale. But over time, the American production was shut down and everything completely went over to China. And as a result, basically, by 2002, the production of rare earths in China, in the US, completely stopped, all for about $56 million sale. So in other words, it is not only about supply chain efficiencies at low cost of production. When we have $100 billion trade deficit with China, we need to look at where we can diversify our sources and how do we really measure the cost of imports. Is it only about the price, the invoice price, or is it about supply chain security and these kinds of vulnerabilities? So the private sector also has a lot of thinking to do, given the massive strategic challenges we face in the coming years. And I had mentioned this earlier, so I will skip this slide. You just have to read this by substituting India for America. So I will end my presentation. Deliberately, I chose not to dwell too much into the current uncertainties because we don't have easy answers. All I could assure you is that the government is seized of the problems, and so many things are moving at a fast pace, starting from coming Friday meeting at Alaska, etc., and then moving on to August 25th trade negotiations, whether they happen or not, and then the relief to export industries, the kind of GDP impact it will have in India, and all these things are still early days because this is last 2 weeks of development. So we can continue to share the uncertainties without finding answers and keep talking. But instead, I wanted to focus the audience attention on the key challenges, the important ones: energy transition, energy security, the inroads AI is making into different aspects of our lives and the implications for India's employment, and also and resource intensity. And third, how public and private sector have to collaborate because these are strategic challenges, and it is not only for public policy. Public policy has to play a role in mobilizing investments, creating the conditions, deregulating, facilitating economic activity. But the private sector also has to think about the long term rather than the next quarter, which is what might have led to many of the challenges we are currently beginning to face. Thank you very much.
Yeah, sir, thank you. I am Sanjay Parekh from Soham Asset Managers. Sir, the economy is persistently slowing down and all the indicators are, showing low growth. And this has been persisting from last year. So, sir, what, according to you, are the reasons and how do we, how do we navigate this? And this is more domestic than global.
Are we taking two more questions together so that we can try to answer them? Are there?
Yes.
So this is Vishal Paria from London. This on the same lines, right? The GST has been slow, is at going at 7 to 8%. Credit growth has slowed. So is there a thought to loosen up the fiscal strings?
Okay, so I can take one more and then try to answer these three questions together.
Can we have one more question so that you can club the answers?
if when we look at mass consumption, that is very weak.
Yeah.
Wage growth is
Yeah.
very weak. Job creation is not happening.
All these three questions are related. First of all, the slowdown last year was mainly due to tight credit conditions and liquidity conditions. They have been eased. The budget gave a substantial tax cut to the middle class. And if you look at urban consumption, in fact, much of the consumption is moving from listed to unlisted companies, and we don't have a good handle on the consumption of services. So if you look at UPI data, if you go to the NPCI website and the UPI ecosystem, merchant category codes, you can see the consumption spending happening in various services sectors. That is a way to track it. It's actually quite healthy. So whether urban consumption has slowed or not also depends on the kind of data we have. And you spoke about the credit growth having slowed down, of course, which is why the central bank cut interest rates by 100 basis points and ensured liquidity surplus. But more importantly, if you look at the private placement, issuance of commercial paper and IPO fundraising, the overall resource mobilization in the economy is not showing slackening. And if you look at the PMI indices, the data on air traffic, port handling, many of those parameters which we all track, I think they are consistent with the fact that the economy will, barring the tariff uncertainties, was growing at a rate of around 6.5%, which we have said couple of times in the economic survey last 2 years is the more likely potential growth given export challenges which I outlined. So I can say that there are multiple indicators which actually point to the fact that it isn't slowing down. It's also because of the statistic that we are looking at. So I think actions have been taken on the fiscal side, on the monetary policy side. Monsoon has been pretty good, and that is why I think if you look at the sale of vehicles in rural India has been pretty good. In urban consumption, we also should look at the fact that, for example, one of the items that caught my attention in the NPCI website, when you go to the UPI ecosystem and merchant category code, there is a category called 5816 merchant code, which is for online gaming. About 10,000 crores per month was the spend in July. So you can imagine the run rate is about 1.2 lakh crores or 1.2 trillion rupees on online gaming for this country. It's a huge number. So naturally there is a consumption diversion that is happening, and the amount of money, obviously in these situations, it is the house that wins and not the speculators. The same thing that happens in options and derivatives as well, in futures and options as well. So I think there are many other dimensions. People may be opting for flexible working model, both employers and employees, thinking that gives them the freedom to pursue a second or third job on the side, or use the free time they think to make gains from asset prices through investment and speculation. And if that is not happening, it could also be having an impact on disposable income, consumer sentiment, and therefore the willingness to spend. So there are, first of all, there are indicators that paint a different picture. If you look at different categories of services, and also the fact that consumption may have moved from listed to unlisted space, and or there could be a certain lack of disposable income because people are using the money for other purposes which are not yielding them the return that will supplement their overall wage and salary income. Or it could be the case that uncertainties with respect to employment in the formal sector and the IT sector could be exerting a drag. So more than the last 2 quarters of drag, I will be more watching what happens now going forward, given that both the trade uncertainties and the IT sector hiring. If you look at the IT sector hiring in the last 11 quarters, excepting for 1 quarter, there was a net headcount reduction in every quarter. So there is a structural change also happening in the economy. Fiscal policy has given a massive tax break, and naturally, unfortunately, its potential is now overshadowed by other developments on the tariff front, etc. And capital formation, by the way, we won't get the data until next February, but private sector capital formation grew very significantly in 24-25. Of course, 25, and that data will be available if you look at the national level only next February. But if you look at anecdotal data, based on bottom-up financial results, GF's gross fixed capital formation picked up quite significantly in 24-25. So I think given the context, I think the growth rate is before the tariff uncertainties was on the right track. And looking only at bank credit growth to understand resource mobilization may also be giving you an incomplete picture. These are my answers to all these three questions taken together. Thank you.
Just one last question from my end, then we can just wind up. One very quick question. On FTA and 2 years ago when you had talked about Chinese FDI, which should have been allowed in Indian space, are you still on the same page as far as that is concerned?
So I think it was in July 2024 economic survey, and it's not a question of allowing investments from China. It's basically you must step back and look at it from the supply chain vulnerability we were facing and we are still facing. So there was a dependency on China in any case in terms of imports, and the idea was to diversify the dependence, channel some of it to investments, and it could also be investments coming from non-Chinese vendors supplying to India from China, whether we could induce them to invest in India. So it need not necessarily be investment from China, because when you look at the import dependence of about $100 billion of trade deficit with China, much of it comes from non-Chinese companies, some of them exporting to their own Indian operations. So in that cases, can we actually look at it from a supply chain perspective and have some of those back-end or backward integration happen in India itself? So so it is not about therefore chasing Chinese entrepreneurs, Chinese investors. It could be about actually trying to attract non-Chinese vendors supplying to India from China. That effort is exactly like China plus one in some sense. Except that the focus is much more on ensuring India's supply chain resilience, and the next step is to use them to locate in India and supply to the world. Obviously, in the current tariff context, it may appear somewhat daunting, but I do believe that the current tariff situation will dissipate in a quarter or two, and the China plus one, which includes not only supplying to India from production located in India and supplying to the rest of the world from India-based production, both will actually pick up momentum. I don't think the current tariff impasse will last for too long, which will completely undermine the economics of supply chain diversification.
Sir, one question from the taxpayer perspective. Amit Sharma from MK Global. So the government has been spending unprecedented amount of money in developmental work. A lot of money is being spent in terms of volume. Are we looking to create some new metrics to track the qualitative and the efficiency aspects of the capex and the spending being done by the government?
It's a good question. I don't have an answer. I'll check with DPIIT, but I'll tell you one thing from a macro perspective. We of course know that the CPI is coming down today predominantly because of food price disinflation or even deflation. And also commodities are generally still not reflecting the global impact of tariffs. Crude oil prices are low, but that is one dimension. But the impact of the supply side infrastructure related investments in the last 5 to 6 years, starting from 2018-19, is evident in the fact that the turnaround time in Indian ports is even better than some of the East Asian ports, barring China. And the same thing to do with movement of goods within the country. So I think you are seeing it, and also if you look at the number of airports that have doubled and the connectivity, for even this year, in the first 4 months of April to July, domestic passenger traffic is up 7% compared to last year's 4 months, which was in turn only up 3% compared to 23-24. So my point is, the impact is visible in the fact that you have a far better growth inflation trade-off, which is what supply chain endowment is supposed to achieve. A supply side infrastructure investment is supposed to achieve. But what it means in terms of economic impact is we should have longer economic cycle than before. That will be the ultimate test of the investment in supply side infrastructure. Earlier in the country, we used to have, after 3 years of growth, overheating, a high current account deficit, high trade deficit, high inflation, real appreciation of the Indian rupee, etc., and then bank NPAs happening. Now, if we are able to lengthen this cycle, that will be the proof of the pudding in terms of supply side infrastructure investments. And I think we are on that track. I think I have to leave, Madhavi. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes, sir.
With this, we end the session. Thank you so much.
Sir, thank you so much. Heartfelt gratitude from the team of NK Global.
Yes.
Thank you so much for being with us, sir. Thank you so
Thank
much.
you. All the
Wish you
best.
very good luck. Thank you.